I just think that one of the biggest blows to any community, and it depends on where you're from, right? But some people think assimilation is a good thing, and to me, I think it's, I wouldn't go so far as to call it evil, but I'd say that it's definitely a death knell for so many different cultures and traditions, and just loss of language, loss of cultural identity, to a certain extent even loss of just identifying with foods and where food comes from. I think those things are just slowly losing traction here in the community. And people have different ideas as to what the culprit of those things are. To me, I put it under the larger umbrella of assimilation, but it could be categories of poverty, it could be categories of loss. All those things multiply to, I think, undermine those traditions and who we are as a people. But to answer your question, the loss of tradition, I think, was the first domino, second domino after the first domino of loss of language. What can you take with you? In a pinch, what can you take with you? If you had to take anything with you other than yourself, right? Your language. And that's where you carry your stories, because we're an oral tradition. We're a community that's based on how we communicate. And once you lose that language, then you start losing every other thing that's tangential to it. That's my opinion anyway. The original pobladores, like any, people looking for a home, I guess you could say they were wandering in the desert, to use the vernacular of the Bible, right? And they're coming through here, and one of the burros in the string of burros decides that he's no longer going to move. So, they do what they do, and they start, hitting the burro with jarras and whatever, just to try and get it to move. And somebody has the bright idea that they should take the load off of the burro, the panniers. So they take everything, the saddle, everything off the burro. It still doesn't move. And call it coincidence, call it legend, I don't know, whatever, but they were going through the load. They were trying to redistribute it to other burros. And as they're redistributing the load, they come across a small likeness of La Virgen de Guadalupe. And somebody in the party says, well, maybe that's a sign that we should build a church to La Virgen here. Maybe that's a sign that we should settle here. So then the burro starts moving. So they took that as a divine sign. So I think to a certain extent, some people maybe think that's kind of a hokey or corny story. But I think in terms of, just the biblical tradition of burros, right? You had the burro that carried Jesus into Jerusalem. You had the burro that carried Mary to Bethlehem. You had the burro that, Jesus sent the other people for. Mike. So in those regards, I think that, I don't know if you've ever seen the back of a burro, how it has a cross on it. And they said that the blessing of the burro for all those things, carrying Mary to Bethlehem, carrying Jesus into Jerusalem, is that cross on every burro's back. So that's the story of how this church was founded. It was down the hill, not far from your grandpa's house, of course. And it was a jacal. But that was before the Conejos was dammed. It was back when it used to flood annually. So that church flooded, right? So they moved it up here to higher ground. And then this church burned in 1920, and then it was rebuilt, right? So this is its fourth incarnation, if you will. So there's that debate that goes back and forth about who's the oldest, San Luis, Antonito, whatever. I'm on record saying that Guadalupe is the oldest town in Colorado. People can disagree with that. And I guess if you wanted to be argumentative, you could say, well, the church in San Acacio is older, but our parish is older, because it was originally founded, in 1848 down in Guadalupe. When the Pueblo Revolt happened, right, everybody was taken out of here, right? They were forced out of here and back down to El Paso. And all this area had been settled already, right? And New Mexico and this region, what have you. Language and faith and religion and just ways of life, those things were left for, I think it was 8 years, if I'm not mistaken, something like that, to survive on their own. And it was churches not unlike this one that kept those things alive. So, I mean, they're integral, I think, to the traditions and they're the bedrock of a community, I guess. When I was my grandma goes to, well, she's deceased, but when I was younger, my grandma would go to church every day, 7 days a week, because we have daily mass, of course. And every morning I remember my mom and dad would drop me off at my grandma's house. Maybe I would go in, maybe I wouldn't, but we would just walk to church, right? And I was this little chamaco, right? We'd walk to church, and I remember she used to let me take my pistols into the church, and I remember shooting at the saints on the walls and stuff like that, and being travieso like that. So those are my first memories of the church, is just I associate them with my grandma. And even today, when I hear prayers and when I participate in the Mass, I participate in the Mass as a Catholic, but I also do it as a communion, with Christ, that's for certain, but as a communion with my ancestors. To me, it's sacred and it's sacred, if that makes sense. Well, the winter fiesta is our Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, right? It happens when she appeared to Juan Diego on Tepeyac in December. And it's just a fiesta in honor of her. So we have a little play that recreates her appearance to Juan Diego, the miracle of the roses and his, the image on the tilpa and those things. So, tilma, excuse me. So we recreate those, and it's a 3-day affair. We start on Friday. Saturday, the Matachines come down from Denver, and they dance. There's a big dinner and live music. It's, like I said, it's just one of those things. They come every year. They never ever turn their back on La Virgen de Guadalupe. They come in, they face her, they dance, they do their ritual. They have for lack of a better term, toy bows and arrows, right? And they have these really elaborate headdresses on, and then when they're done with their performance or their ritual, then they back up down the center, but they never turn their back on her. So if I'm putting 2 and 2 together, because I don't know their definitive role, is that they are here to praise her and defend her. But I can't say that for certain. I've never actually asked. I should, I suppose. The summer one's a more recent thing, right? Because we thought that we were losing a lot of youth in the church, and we thought that the winter fiesta suffered for several reasons, but mostly because everybody plays basketball, whether you're good at basketball or not. Right? There's just not enough kids. There's so many different things going on, and the youth involvement was such that we thought that we could have another fiesta middle of the year in the summer, so that we could reinvigorate, not the community, but although that helps, but to reinvigorate the youth and bring them closer to church and the activities here. So that was we've only had 2 summer fiestas, but that's why we have it, and that's one of the reasons we started it. I mentioned assimilation earlier. My parents' first language was Spanish. Obviously my grandpa's and grandma's, their first was Spanish. But when my parents came to school, they were beaten by the nuns for speaking Spanish. I mean, you can ask anybody from my mom and dad's generation. You could ask Stefan's grandpa about it. You all hear the same story. So a lot of the kids weren't taught Spanish, but since my mom and dad needed a babysitter, my grandma was available, and she didn't care what the nuns thought. At least I assumed that. And she was very comfortable teaching me Spanish. And I thought it was a code, right? I thought we were the only 2 people on earth that spoke that language. I swear. Everybody else would try and get me to speak in Spanish, and I would talk to them in English. And then my grandma would talk to me, and I would reply to her in Spanish, because I thought that was our language. So and then our priest was from Spain, so the Mass was I was married in Spanish. When Michelle and I came to talk to the priest, he goes, well, what readings do you want? And, and those type of things, and he was organizing the Mass, and I said, well, we want it to be in Spanish. He goes, milagro. And he was so happy. I can still remember that. And we have the video, and he's praising us for getting married in Spanish or whatever, but I've always associated church with Spanish. But, so yeah, I mean, my grandma, she spoke English, don't get me wrong, but Spanish was her language. Valley Spanish. For the 150th anniversary of the church, this is a decree by the Pope. This came from Rome, and it's a special dispensation door on a very specific day in honor of the 150th anniversary of the church. So because it was this door, oldest church in Colorado, the decree came from the Vatican. We commissioned Annie Troncoso, a local artist, to do some panels for the door. So I mean, they're kind of self-explanatory. The crescent moon, you know, similar to the crescent moon that the Virgen de Guadalupe is standing on. You know, the stars in her garment, you know, in a line with the crescent moon up here and the stars. These are the original pobladores, you know, that came here in 1848. No burro in the picture, but you can imagine the burros are on there somewhere. Down here you have, this is supposed to depict the generations of the church. The original, I think they were Benedictine sisters, if I'm not mistaken, and the Theatine fathers. And then there's some contemporary or some younger generation in that same painting. And then this one is supposed to depict Juan Diego.